Part 5, Section 1, Chapter 16 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16, Religious Literature. In the fierce struggle for existence which the colonies had to pass through, it is not a matter for wonder that the literary production of the early period was scanty. And had it not been for the imperial intellectual endowments of the Puritans, the literary output would have been scantier still. In Virginia, a premium was put on ignorance. When Sir William Berkeley was recalled, in 1677, his policy of discouraging learning was continued. There was no printing press in Virginia earlier than 1681, and when one was set up, the poor printer was required to give bonds, "not to print anything hereafter until his Majesty's pleasure shall be known," which Professor Moses Coit Taylor rightly calls "a gracious way of intimating a perpetual prohibition." Governor Effingham received from home, in 1683, the caution "to allow no person to use a printing press on any occasion whatever." The first printing was done in Virginia in 1729, and until the eve of the War of the Revolution there was only one press in the colony. Nevertheless, Virginia is not without some worthy literary remains. Alexander Whittaker, the Apostle of Virginia, one of the noblest and purest men God gave to America, wrote "Good News from Virginia," which was published in London in 1613. It was an earnest appeal for English evangelism in the new land. Father Andrew White, the Jesuit priest who accompanied the first colonists to Maryland, wrote in Latin an account of the country, Relatio Itineris in Marylandum, which was discovered in Rome in 1832. James Blair was the first author of any merit in Virginia. His Present State of Virginia and the College, of William and Mary, of which he was president for 50 years, published in London in 1727, is written in excellent style, and his 117 discourses on "Our Saviour's Divine Sermon on the Mount" was twice published in London during the author's lifetime, and received the praise of Daniel Waterland. Hugh Jones, rector of Jamestown and chaplain to the Colonial Assembly, issued in London in 1724 a book on "The Present State of Virginia," which is one of the most useful books of the colonial period. In it he describes the college as "without a chapel, without a scholarship, and without a statute. There is a library without books, comparatively speaking, and a president without a fixed salary till of late." He makes an appeal for ministers, not "quarrelsome and litigious ministers who would differ with their parishioners about insignificant trifles, nor mere scholars and stoics, nor zealots too rigid in outward appearance," but earnest men, with level heads and pure hearts, who can labor among a people who "are for moderate views neither high nor low, and who never refuse to shout, 'God bless the Church, and George its defender, convert the fanatics, and balk the pretender.'" In the middle colonies only two names appear as worthy of mention here, Jonathan Dickinson and Samuel Davies. Dickinson was a New Englander and an able theologian, ranking next to Jonathan Edwards. Davies was an eloquent preacher, but his published sermons hardly bear out his great reputation when living. In literary productiveness, New England made up for what the other colonies lacked. Yet here also the dread of dissent acted as a gag. When the first printing press was set up in Cambridge, in 1639, the president of Harvard College acted as a kind of censor. But he was not strict enough. The clergy thought they discerned in some of the books a tendency to "open the door of heresy." In 1662 two men were appointed to officially superintend the issues of the naughty machine, and their consent was indispensable before anything could be printed. A revised edition of the Imitation of Christ passed this ordeal in 1667, but the clergy discovered that it was a book written "by a popish minister, wherein is contained some things that are less safe to be infused among the people of this place," and ordered "a more full revisal" of the book. In the meantime the press should stand still. It was not till 21 years before the Revolution that this censorship ceased. In one sense, all the literature in early New England was a religious literature. But here we will speak only of those writers of some prominence more directly connected with the religious development. William Bradford, of the Mayflower, the father of American history, wrote a "History of Plymouth Plantation," in which the religious idea predominates. This book was given up for lost until it was found, in 1855, in the Fulham Library of the Bishop of London. Bradford's nephew, Nathaniel Morton, Secretary of Plymouth Colony from 1645 to 1685, made this history the basis of his own "New England's Memorial" (1669), which was printed at Cambridge. A simple faith breathes throughout Governor Winthrop's "History of New England" (1649). Of great interest is Captain Edward Johnson's "Wonder‐working Providence of Zion's Saviour in New England," first published anonymously in London in 1654, republished by Draper of Andover in 1867. Johnson was the founder of Woburn, Massachusetts, and a typical Puritan layman. Thomas Hooker, the founder of Hartford in 1636, had a mind of lofty grandeur and masculine force. He wrote 23 books, all in the different departments of theology. Thomas Shepard, the minister of Cambridge, 1636 to 1649, "a Timothy in the family and a Chrysostom in the pulpit," was the spiritual quickener of Jonathan Edwards, who drew deeply from him for his "Treatise Concerning Religious Affections." John Cotton was the Pope of New England. Roger Williams reported the people of New England as saying that "they could hardly believe that God would suffer Mr. Cotton to err." He was a prolific author of all kinds of theological works. He carried on a controversy with Roger Williams on the right of persecution. Roger Buckley, the founder of Concord, and minister there from 1636 till his death in 1659, published in London a series of sermons on "The Gospel Covenant" (1646), "one of those massive, exhaustive, ponderous treatises into which the Puritan theologians put their enormous biblical learning, their acumen, their industry, the fervor, pathos, and consecration of their lives." As we go down the stream, it becomes impossible to do justice, in this slight sketch, to the religious writings of the New England fathers. We pass President Chauncey, Roger Williams, who bravely pitted himself against the giant Cotton, the marvelous Mather family, Richard, Increase his son, with his 92 works, Cotton, the son of Increase, with a list almost as large, among them the Magnalia Christi Americana, London, 1702, a storehouse for all our historians; the sturdy John Wise, Samuel Sewall, with his plea for women; Thomas Prince, who first applied historical criticism to the writings of our annals; Anne Bradstreet, the Mrs. Browning of Puritanism; Michael Wigglesworth, the poet of its grim Calvinism; Willard the theologian; John Higginson, and many other clergymen of cultured mind and strong thought; and lastly, Jonathan Edwards, the flower of Puritanism, the saint, the philosopher, the missionary, the scholar, the man of science, the divine, the preacher; a Thomas à Kempis, a Calvin, a Jeremy Taylor in one. Chapter 17.